BMF, short for Black Mafia Family, is one of the most infamous underground organizations in American history. They amassed millions of dollars, owned luxurious mansions, drove extravagant supercars, and dominated the entertainment industry with unparalleled influence. Their story is a jaw-dropping saga of how young men from the bottom rungs of society broke through barriers and infiltrated the upper echelons, transitioning from the blood-soaked streets of Detroit to lavish yacht parties in Miami. This is the tale of the Black Mafia Family. In Boynton, an isolated neighborhood severed by a river, lies a forgotten community amidst a crumbling city. This area epitomized the depths of poverty, rife with violence and rampant crime. Here, at 1555 Edsel Street, one of the three remaining houses in the neighborhood, Demetrius and Terry Flannery were born and raised. Despite growing up in such a harsh environment, the two brothers were determined to rise above their circumstances and build a better life. Demetrius, the older brother, was magnetic and charismatic, with a flair for standing out in any crowd. In stark contrast, Terry was reserved, shunning attention and maintaining a low profile. Despite their opposing personalities, they shared one remarkable trait: an innate ability to make money, a talent they discovered and nurtured at a young age. During their high school years, the brothers began dabbling in business, selling anything that could turn a profit. While both were skilled entrepreneurs, their approaches differed significantly. Demetrius thrived on networking, connecting with people, and making himself the center of attention. Terry, though quieter, was razor-sharp and incredibly cautious. These contrasting styles would lead them down an extraordinary path, a path paved with power and wealth that overshadowed everything else. Demetrius, later known as Meech, craved the spotlight, constantly boasting about himself and drawing others into his orbit, especially women. Terry, on the other hand, stayed in the shadows, avoiding the limelight and maintaining a humble, discreet demeanor. Their starkly different personalities would become a defining factor in shaping their future. By the time Meech was in the 11th grade, his small business ventures were thriving, earning him a steady income of $1,000 per week, a staggering sum for a teenager. Yet for Meech, it was nowhere near enough to satisfy his grand ambitions. In 1984, a friend named Kilo devised a daring plan. Kilo's uncle, Edric E.D. Boyd, was a drug kingpin who controlled distribution networks in both Miami and Detroit. E.D. was the very key Meech and Kilo needed to unlock their next chapter. After months of meticulous planning, Meech finally met E.D. Boyd, with unshakable confidence and a charm that outshone his rivals. Meech left a lasting impression on the drug lord. Not only did he convey an unwavering determination, but he also ignited E.D.'s belief in a shared vision of wealth and power. Their meeting led to an agreement, and the very next day, Meech began his journey into the world of drug trafficking, a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. Meech and his team introduced a revolutionary strategy, selling 50-gram packages of cocaine at below-market prices. This bold move created a tidal wave of demand, attracting customers from all over. To keep up with the explosive growth, Meech enlisted his brother Terry and close friend D. Meeks, laying the foundation for what would become the Black Mafia Family empire. And so began the rise of BMF, a criminal dynasty built on ingenuity, audacity, and the unrelenting pursuit of power. The notoriety of their 50-gram cocaine bags quickly established the 50 Boys as major players in Southwest Detroit. Word of their affordable, high-quality products spread like wildfire, drawing people from all over the city and even neighboring states who flocked to buy from them. Before long, the nickname the 50-gram Boys became infamous across Detroit. By early 1985, Big Meech had become wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. He sported a thick gold chain, donned luxurious fur coats, and drove flashy cars. Yet, in the treacherous world they inhabited, Meech's fortune could vanish in an instant. To maintain control and cohesion, E.D. Boyd, the group's mentor and supplier, held weekly Sunday meetings at his home. These gatherings served as a time for the 50 boys to share meals and discuss the happenings on the streets. However, one recurring topic often turned these meetings tense: Meech's ostentatious behavior. ED repeatedly warned Meech that his flashy lifestyle, wearing extravagant jewelry, driving conspicuous cars, and constantly seeking attention, was a magnet for law enforcement and rival gangs. But Meech, driven by pride and an insatiable need to stand out, refused to change his ways. He wanted all eyes on him, even if it meant endangering the entire operation. Meanwhile, ED was embroiled in a long-standing feud with Leighton Simon, an infamous Detroit kingpin known as Leighton Beast. The animosity between ED and Leighton dated back to before the rise of the 50 Boys. Leighton controlled the 12th Street area, and though both men commanded respect in their territories, they had avoided direct conflict until 1985. In June of that year, tensions escalated during a high-profile boxing match at the iconic Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, a hotspot for the rich and powerful. Amid the glittering crowd of prominent figures, an unusual moment unfolded. Leighton Simon and Big Meech found themselves standing next to each other, their gazes locked in an unrelenting stare-down. Meech, never one to back down from a confrontation, felt disrespected when Leighton brushed past him in the bustling crowd. Though the initial contact seemed accidental, Meech interpreted it as an intentional slight. Finally, unable to restrain himself after another bump, Meech confronted Leighton with piercing eyes. He stepped forward and said, "If you bump into me one more time, we're going to have a problem." Those words hung in the air, thick with tension, leaving the surrounding crowd uneasy. Leighton, who already despised ED Boyd, found new fuel for his hatred of the 50 Boys. This simmering resentment would soon ignite into a chain of violent events. In 1987, at just 15 years old, Terry Flenory began to make his mark on Detroit. Like his brother Meech, Terry wanted to carve out his own identity and earn recognition as a rising kingpin. He adopted the name Southwest T, a title that reflected his ambitions to dominate the region. On February 22, 1987, Terry was driving to his mother's house on 9th Street in a course. As a fierce snowstorm blanketed the streets, Terry parked his car and rushed inside to escape the biting cold. That urgency saved his life. Moments later, a gunshot rang out. Had Terry been just a second slower, the bullet would have struck his head. Instead, it grazed his eye, leaving him gravely wounded. His mother rushed him to the hospital, where doctors managed to save his life. Though he lost vision in one eye, news of the attack sent shockwaves through the 50 Boys. Furious and shaken, they were determined to retaliate. Convinced that this brazen act of violence was orchestrated by Leighton Simon, tensions within Detroit's criminal underworld reached a boiling point. But the chaos didn't end there. Just months later, Kilo, ED Boyd's nephew and a trusted member of the crew, was found dead in his truck. The circumstances surrounding his murder were shrouded in mystery, sending further ripples of fear and anger through the 50 Boys. This was only the beginning of an uncontrollable spiral of violence and retribution that would reshape Detroit's criminal landscape. A pervasive sense of unease hung over Detroit, and as they walked the streets, members of the 50 Boys were always armed. They knew that anyone could be an enemy and that their lives could be stolen in the blink of an eye. On May 3, 1987, around 30 members of the 50 Boys were cruising in their luxury cars, blasting music along Woodward Avenue, near the Coney Island Diner, unaware that Leighton Simon lived nearby. When Leighton heard about the gathering, he wasted no time driving over with his brother. What followed was a violent confrontation between the two groups. The chaos was swift and brutal. Leighton Simon was shot 4 times in the back, but miraculously survived. However, his brother wasn't so lucky. Leighton had to watch the death of his closest family member, an image that would burn into his mind, fueling his hatred for the 50 Boys and igniting his thirst for revenge. Meanwhile, the 50 Boys felt invincible, having not only fended off the attack, but also walked away with a substantial sum of money. Big Meech, feeling untouchable, grew increasingly arrogant. In 1989, he decided it was time to prove once again that he was the strongest. On May 22, 1989, Meech came up with a bold idea. He threw a massive street party right outside Layton's grandmother's house. The sound of loud music blared from the expensive cars, while laughter and chatter filled the air. This act of defiance drove Layton into a fury, and he immediately sped over, seething with anger. What followed was a barrage of gunfire in the dead of night. Meech was shot 12 times, and the situation looked grim. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. It seemed like the end of everything. But Meech defied the odds and survived. This close call shocked him into reassessing his reckless behavior. That very night, the 50 boys held an emergency meeting, realizing that the violent lifestyle they had been living could no longer continue, especially with the ever-present threat of Layton Simon hanging over them. After much deliberation, Meech and his crew made a difficult but necessary decision. They had to leave Detroit. Leaving the city where they had dominated for so long was not an easy choice, but they understood that staying meant risking their lives every day. However, their departure was only part of the plan. The 50 boys would not just change locations. They would completely transform their operations. They rebranded themselves as the Black Mafia Family, symbolizing their newfound ambition and drawing inspiration from the powerful mafia families of 20th century Italy. Street confrontations were no longer their focus. Money was. Southwest T relocated to Los Angeles, establishing connections in California and even eyeing expansion into Mexico. Meanwhile, Big Meech chose Atlanta as his new base. However, the first year in Atlanta was far from easy. While they had once been pulling in millions of dollars a month in Detroit, now they were scraping by with only a few $1,000s. But even in adversity, there was fortune to be found. In 1990, Southwest T forged a key partnership with Wayne Jordan, a man with extensive connections throughout Mexico and access to some of the cheapest cocaine on the market. This partnership proved to be a game changer for the Black Mafia family. Wayne opened a warehouse in Los Angeles, where drugs were packaged and shipped, while the crew's assistants spread out across the country to establish new networks. Within a short time, they were generating massive profits, with money flowing in like never before. Meech began to flaunt his wealth in the most extravagant ways. Atlanta became his stronghold, and it was here that he set his sights on becoming the most powerful kingpin in the nation. Meech and his associates were often seen at the hottest clubs in Atlanta, cruising in their shiny luxury cars, adorned with dazzling diamond chains and draped in expensive fur coats. In a short time, the name BMF became synonymous with luxury and power in the city's elite circles. However, Southwest T, who remained in Los Angeles, didn't share the same mindset. He tried to maintain a more low-key, modest image, not wanting to attract too much attention, something Meech viewed as complacency. Meech firmly believed that fame was his ultimate goal. He had no qualms about flaunting his wealth, living extravagantly, and showing off his success. But alongside the showiness, he worked tirelessly to keep his operations running smoothly. By 1990, Meech had acquired 8 expensive mansions spread across Atlanta. Each property was used as a stash house, a base for handling deals and distributing goods across the U.S. The scale of their operations quickly surpassed what the two brothers could handle alone, leading them to hire experts to manage the expanding business. In 1998, BMF brought on a highly skilled yet risky financial expert, Doc Marshall, a genius in mathematics and economics. Although he came from a different background, far removed from the streets, Doc's sharp economic insights propelled the business to new heights. However, a mind like Doc's in the underground world could have unintended consequences. While the business thrived, Meech began to grow restless with simply making money from drug dealing. He started nurturing new ambitions. In 2001, as Meech was becoming a star in Atlanta's underground scene, he met Jay Jenkins, also known as Young Jeezy, a major player from Hawkinsville who had turned his street earnings into a successful rap career. Inspired by Jeezy's rise to fame, Meech wanted to carve out his own path in the music industry. But since he lacked rap skills, he decided to establish a music label, BMF Entertainment. Meech invested millions into music production, determined to prove that he could make money in entertainment. His initial goal was to sign young Jeezy. But since Jeezy had his own label, Meech shifted focus to signing rapper Blue Da Vinci. He spent over $500,000 on each music video, buying luxury cars and designer clothes for Da Vinci. Yet the results were disappointing. Despite receiving top-tier resources, Blue Da Vinci never reached the stardom Meech had envisioned. For Southwest T, this was a clear sign that BMF's music venture was doomed. Tensions rose between the brothers, and their disagreements over strategy led to a rift. In the past, they had kept each other in check, always warning each other when one made a mistake. But now, their differences were irreparable. Meech, no longer holding back, decided to elevate his lavish lifestyle to new extremes, regardless of the consequences. This decision marked the beginning of an inevitable decline for BMF. The split between the brothers, combined with Meech's obsession with living in opulence and his disregard for the fallout, started to undermine the empire they had built together. In 2002, Big Meech began hosting extravagant parties at his lavish mansion in Buckhead, a neighborhood known for its affluent residents where everything had to be perfect and luxurious. But Meech didn't care about following the rules. He wanted everything to be on his terms. The parties went on all night, loud and packed with celebrities like Jeezy, Fabulous, and Diddy, along with their entourages. These were not simple social gatherings. They were displays of excess, as if Meech wanted the world to know he existed, that he was at the pinnacle of power and he wasn't afraid to show it. But things did not go as smoothly as Meech had anticipated. At 7 a.m. on September 17th, 2003, three men unexpectedly broke into the BMF mansion through the garage. These intruders moved like shadows, but within seconds, panic set in. BMF immediately realized they were being watched, and a chase began. In a frantic rush to cover their tracks, the BMF crew quickly began packing everything into their cars, preparing to leave the mansion. They left Doc Marshall behind to handle the police. Doc claimed that he had confronted the intruders and chased them off, all within the law of Georgia, but the police, suspicious, continued their investigation. They obtained a search warrant, and the entire mansion was thoroughly searched. The Atlanta police spent hours combing through every corner of the house. Eventually, they discovered a large quantity of drugs hidden in the bedroom closet. Doc Marshall was arrested on the spot and taken into custody. Despite this, Big Meech and Terry remained unfazed. Life went on as usual. The lavish parties moved from the mansion to local clubs, and every time Meech appeared, he was always accompanied by a large entourage of BMF members. On November 12, 2004, Meech and his crew arrived at Club Chaos. After a while, Meech struck up a conversation with a woman, unaware that she was dating Anthony Jones, known as Wolf, a bodyguard for P. Diddy. Anthony approached Meech and asked him to stop, but Meech saw this as a sign of disrespect. He immediately shoved Anthony, causing the latter to angrily leave the club. However, trouble was on the horizon. As Meech and his group were leaving the club at 4 a.m., they encountered Anthony again in the parking lot. A verbal altercation quickly escalated into a violent confrontation. What seemed like a situation that could have been easily defused spiraled out of control, with the violence intensifying. The next morning, Meech was arrested for the altercation, and it seemed like the end of the story. But a surprising turn of events occurred. Meech was released on the grounds of self-defense. The bizarre part was that, despite everything that had just happened, the Atlanta police still didn't realize who they had arrested. Big Meech, a name that should have been a significant challenge to the system, had once again slipped through their fingers. He and the BMF continued to thrive as if nothing had happened, while the people around him saw Meech as just another wealthy businessman in Atlanta. Few knew that he was running the largest underground empire in the country at that time. His extravagant lifestyle, with his fleet of luxury cars, palatial homes, and lavish parties, hid the true nature of his operation. Although those around him saw no cause for alarm, the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, decided to investigate. When they looked at Big Meech's tax records, something seemed off. Despite his immense wealth, his fleet of supercars, his extravagant mansions, and his lifestyle of excess, Meech's reported income was only a mere $200,000 a year. DEA agents knew they had uncovered something suspicious, and they decided to present their findings to a judge to obtain permission to wiretap his phones. At first, the agents thought tracking Terry Flenory would be easy, but they didn't anticipate the complexity of BMF's communications. Terry had over 20 different phones and never used his real name or official addresses during calls. Every member of BMF used aliases and encrypted their conversations, as if speaking in a secret language. The agents were starting to feel frustrated, thinking all their efforts might be in vain, until Terry unknowingly made a comment that would change everything. In a conversation with an assistant, Terry made a comment that enraged the agents. The police aren't smart enough to wiretap phones like in The Wire. The agents were immediately offended. They were determined not to back down, working through the night to crack Terry's encryption, and eventually, they succeeded. On December 5, 2004, a new shipment was about to be transported. This time, a man named Jeffrey Lair was assigned to deliver the goods to the Buckhead mansion. The car, filled with illicit items, was driven by Jeffrey and his girlfriend, headed for Louisville, Kentucky. What Jeffrey didn't know was that every one of Terry's phone calls had been monitored by the FBI, and they knew exactly when the shipment was going to take place. Instead of arresting him immediately, the agents devised a smarter plan. They contacted the Missouri State Police and instructed them to conduct a routine traffic stop on Jeffrey Lair. Though it seemed like just another routine stop, the agents had carefully planned it to ensure BMF would be none the wiser. When the car reached Florissant, Missouri, it was pulled over. Upon searching the vehicle, the police found all the evidence they needed. Jeffrey was arrested and, thinking it was no big deal, called Terry from the county jail. What he didn't realize was that this call was a trap set by the agents. In his conversation, he detailed everything, giving the agents exactly what they needed to take down BMF. At this point, half of the investigators wanted to arrest Terry immediately, hoping for a 10-year sentence. But the other half wanted something bigger. They wanted to take down the entire BMF empire. The lead investigator, who had been steering the case, believed he could shake Jeffrey's trust. He threatened Jeffrey with 20 years in prison if he didn't cooperate. In the end, Jeffrey surrendered. What was terrifying, however, was that BMF still had no idea what was happening. They thought it would take Jeffrey a long time to handle the situation, completely unaware that panic was slowly creeping through the organization. Meech and Terry were still living in a false sense of security, unaware that a storm was brewing. No one in BMF could have predicted what was coming next. On October 17, 2005, the FBI raided all 9 BMF mansions in Atlanta. But strangely, they found nothing. Every trace of evidence had been swiftly erased, almost as if BMF knew what was coming. At that point, the FBI was left with only wiretaps on Terry and Jeffrey Lair's phones. But they still didn't have enough to bring BMF down. BMF's lawyers believed that Terry would only face a 10-year sentence, which wasn't too severe. As for Meech, there was no solid evidence to tie him to any crimes. However, everything started to crumble in an irreversible way. Doc Marshall, a former key figure in the organization, unexpectedly testified against BMF. He provided crucial information that helped the FBI arrest 36 members of the crew, including Big Meech. This was the fatal blow. The BMF organization was completely crippled. The mansions, the luxury cars, the lavish parties, and all the glory vanished in an instant. Throughout the investigation, the agents couldn't believe the scale of BMF's operations. Some estimates suggested that BMF was making over $300 million a year from drug trafficking. But no one could have predicted that the empire would collapse so swiftly. In the end, Terry and Demetrius were sentenced to 30 years in prison. In 2020, Terry was released, and Meech will be free in 2026. But the question remains, will they truly reform when they're released, or will they quietly return to their illicit ways? And what do you think truly led to the fall of BMF, Meech's flashy lifestyle? the organization's carelessness, or the determination of the DEA? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to support us by liking and subscribing. See you in the next video.